Perfect.
Hi, John. Our other delegate isn't here yet, so we're going to actually have you go first, if you can hear me.
Oh, okay, no
Okay,
problem.
sounds good. Thank you.
Am I good to go?
Okay, I will call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for March 11th, starting at 4:30. First up, any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, you can declare now or anytime during the meeting. Hearing none, we'll move on to delegations, and we'll go to John Evans for our 2020 financial statement.
Thank you for having me. I think everybody has the draft financials in their package. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. So 1 second. Oh, it says screen sharing's disabled.
We're working on it, John. Just hold on for a
Okay,
second.
no problem.
You should be able to now.
Okay, I'll give it a try here. Okay, can you see the financials?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I guess first of all, before we get into it, thank you for having me. And I should probably do a quick introduction since it's a whole new council. Well, not whole new council, but relatively new council. So my name is John Evans. I'm a partner at the BDO office in Fort Frances. I've been involved in the town of Atikokan audits in some way, shape, or form since 2002. So even back to the old uh, the school office days. So been around for a little bit and have some good history, I guess, on the community. So um, obviously we're here presenting 2020, which is almost 4 years behind, which is not a great situation. So as far as moving forward, been working with Brandy on coming up with a plan to get the town caught up. So the really the biggest issue for us and the town is one, it's a very large engagement. It takes a lot of prep to get ready, right? So there's really two pieces. There's the preparing for the year end on the town side, and then making sure that we have a team of auditors available to do the actual audit when the year end's ready to be done. So um, working with Brandy, I think, in a perfect world, we would like to see 21 and 22 at a very minimum be done before the end of the calendar year here. And I would say in a perfect world, see 23, although that, to be honest, that would be pretty aggressive. So I think getting 2 years done in this fiscal year would be very good. as far as some other services we provide other than the audit, we also help prepare the FIR. So I know there's some new council members here. The FIR is called the Financial Information Return. It's the return that the municipality uses to report to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So that's been provided to Brandy. She does some statistical information, gets added into there in addition to the financial information. And I believe the 2020 FIR has been filed. Certainly the ministry was looking for that. And I think that's where that one's at. Brandy, are you on the call as well?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So has the 2020 FIR been filed?
Yes. After
Okay.
a lot of struggle, we finally got it uploaded.
Uploaded. Okay, perfect. So the ministry will still be looking for the audited financials, which we're presenting the draft today. I think they're in final format. I've scaled back my presentation a little bit since we're reporting on information that's 4 years historical, but when I started to prepare, I kind of felt like, you know what, there's a certain amount of information I need to be able to provide so that you have a good understanding of the financials. So I ended up basically going through them. I'm just going to hone it down a little bit. But if there's any questions while we're going through, please feel free to ask. Stop me during the presentation. I'll probably stop every once in a while and just ask if there's any questions. But I intend, I'm hoping at the end of the presentation that council's comfortable with the drafts and that you're in a position to approve them. So, any questions so far, or can I get into it? Okay. So hearing none. So if we look at the financial statements, I've got a copy here, the exact copy you're looking at with the draft watermark removed. So just going to start on page 2, which is the Statement of Management Responsibility and Financial Reporting. This is unique to public sector accounting. So if anybody's dealt with financial statements before, this is a report that is unique to the public sector. It's basically a disclosure that mayor and administration have to sign, saying that basically acknowledges that the financial statements are yours, that it's your obligation to keep, internal controls and sets of books and records in place to govern and manage the municipal assets, and that you're essentially acknowledging that through this sign off. If we go to the next page, so the next 2 pages is our auditor's report. So this is our opinion on the financial statements. This, at the end of the day, the financial statements are yours. You engage us to help you make sure that they're in accordance with public sector accounting standards, which we do, but they're actually, the financial information itself is yours. But pages 3 and 4 is actually our audit report, and they're basically giving our opinion on the financial statements. So it's really broken into 3 sections. And the first section is honestly the most important. That's our opinion, okay? And I am happy to say that it's an unqualified or a clean audit report. So basically, I'm just going to read the paragraph. In our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements have been fairly presented in all material respects. The consolidated financial position of the group as at December 31st, 2020, and its consolidated financial performance and its consolidated cash flows for the year that ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So that's the report you want. It's a clean audit report. The next paragraph, the basis for opinion, just discloses the standards we use to prepare our audit, which is the generally accepted auditing standards in Canada for the public sector. The third section is really a repeat of the government, the management and governance obligations and responsibilities. So just kind of rehashing what was on the page before. And then the last section, which is the bottom of page 3 and all of page 4, really talks about how we do the audit. So how we plan it, we base our audit on risk, that we gather enough evidence to be able to provide an opinion, and we've done that. So that's our audit report. You'll see the date down here is March 11th today. Our audit report needs to be dated after those with corporate governance approve the financials. So assuming that you're comfortable with the financials today and you approve them, we've done all the work we need to do to be able to issue our opinion. So the actual audit report will be dated today. Any questions on that? Okay, so the next page, is that big enough to see? Okay, great. So this is a picture of the municipality at a point in time. That's the best way to explain it. So it's like a snapshot at a point in time of all the assets, the liabilities, and the equity, I guess you call it, or surplus of the municipality. And just a reminder that when the municipality reports, it has to report on everything. So it's a combination of, you know, all your general operations, sewer and water, roads, rec, library, and then in addition to that, you have to consolidate any entities that you control. So in this case, it would be Atikokan Hydro, and Atikokan Enercom also gets grouped into here. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about how it gets treated when we go through the numbers, but all of those things make up the financial statements and the financial position of the town of Atikokan. So the first column is what was there on December 31st, 2020. And the second column is what was there on December 31st, 2019. So I'm going to kind of run through the items, tell you a little bit about what's there, the change, just to get a better understanding of it. So you can see cash and cash equivalents is the first item. There was 7,044,000 roughly at the end of the year. That was an increase of approximately 2,171,000. The biggest reason for the increase in cash was that you collected a bunch of provincial grants from the year before. So in 2019, there was a whole bunch of sewage treatment plant work going on, and most of that was funded through provincial grants. There was also some road resurfacing that was funded by provincial grants, and that money hadn't been received until 2020. So in 2019, it was sitting in receivables. In 2020, you realized that cash, you received it, and that was a big reason for the increase in cash. Also, though, during the year, you repaid long-term debt of just a little bit over $1 million, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And also, you had some payables related to the sewer and water capital that hadn't been paid until after year end, which again is normal. So payables were a little higher. But at the end of the day, the significant increase in cash was mostly just recovering those provincial grants. Second item is taxes receivable, 921,000 at the end of the year versus 752. So there was an increase there. That'd be a combination of just regular taxes receivable, but also properties and tax sale. There was there was 10 properties in tax sale at the end of 2020. I think that was an increase of 1 over the previous year. One of the things that administration does each year is they look at, and for both the taxes and the properties and tax sale, is we look at what the amounts owing are and look at what the expected recovery is. So if there's it's anticipated that the town's not going to recover all that money, then there's an allowance. So these funds are basically net of allowances, the amounts that were receivable at the end of the year. One of the things we like to do, just kind of as a measure, is say what percentage of the taxes receivable are the taxes receivable of total tax revenue. So in 2020, your taxes receivable were about 10.6% of tax revenue. That's a bit of an increase over last year. 2019 was about 8.8%. However, if I go back to 2018 or 2017, it was over 10% in those years. So still running in line with where Atikokan typically sits. There's other municipalities that are much lower than that, but there's also other municipalities, and I'm specifically talking about the Northwest, that are higher than that as well. I think the one comment I would make in Atikokan is that a really big portion of your tax revenue comes through what's called grants in lieu or payments in lieu. So that's your OPG money, your Valerie Falls money. If we took those things out of your revenue and did that percentage, your receivables would be closer to 20% of taxes receivable. So something just I think to keep an eye on. But I guess if I look at the last 5 years from 2020 back, things were fairly consistent. Any questions so far? Okay. Accounts receivable. So that's everything else that was owing to the town at the end of the year. So you can see it was down significantly from the previous year, 1.93 million, and that was primarily from those provincial capital grants that were owing to the town at the end of 2019, and in 2020 we didn't have as much capital work happening, and so there was less receivables there. The other big chunk of that is HST. So the municipality gets to recover a big chunk of the HST that it pays. In 2019, there was a lot of capital work going on, and so therefore there was a bigger HST receivable at the end of 19. In 2020, there was still a significant HST receivable, but it's lower because there was less capital work happening. So it was about 570,000 of that balance. There was also one significant grant still happening that was carrying on over a number of years, and that is had to do with the sewage treatment plant. It's called the Ontario Small Communities or New Building Fund, and it made up another 881,000 of the receivable at the end of the year. So nothing in there really of concern with respect to valuation. That's always what we're looking at, is there, are we comfortable that the township is going to receive those funds? And that was all good value receivable. The last item in the financial assets is investment in government business enterprises. Okay, and this is made up of two things. It's made up of the Atikokan Hydro investment and Atikokan Enercom investment. So these are a little bit unique. The way the rules work is they say if a municipality or a government is invested in a business and that business is self-sufficient, then you basically record your original investment in that business, plus or minus whatever your share of the profits are or the losses each year. Okay, and in the case of both Atikokan Hydro and Atikokan Enercom, they're 100% owned assets. So basically each year, if one of them has a profit, you pick up 100% of the profit, and that's an increase in the carrying value of the investments. Or if there was a loss, there would be a decrease. So you can see the investment in government business enterprises increased by 146,000 this year. That was the 2020 hydro profits of 141,000 and the 2020 Atikokan Enercom profits of $5,000. I guess just a point to note, we also do the audit for Atikokan Hydro out of our office. Both the Atikokan Hydro and the Atikokan Enercom are up to date. So the 2022 year ends have been issued and filed, and the 2023 year ends are in process. So those ones are current. Okay, so total assets at the end of 2020 of financial assets of just over 14 million. Any questions on that? Okay. On the liability side, so again, just kind of going through where we're at here, liabilities and accrued accounts payable and accrued liabilities of 2,367,000 at the end of the year, up about 438,000. That would include holdbacks on to contractors on the sewage treatment plant. It included almost 1.2 million due to the major contractor on the sewage treatment plant. Again, it was just a normal timing of the business transaction. We would have seen the payment of those payables after year end, so no concerns there. It also includes a vacation payable to employees. And then the one thing I want to note, which is somewhat unique and it happens in all the municipalities that we deal with, is often people prepay their taxes. So for example, on their mortgage, they might have like a regular ongoing payment that comes off their mortgage, or they have a regular monthly payment that goes off. The town had actually collected 440,000 of taxes for 2021 that you physically had received at December 31st, 2020. So those show up as a payable. In reality, we know that those taxes are just going to be retained by the township in 2021, but they don't get treated as revenue until 2021 comes around. So there's about 440,000 of that that's sitting as an accrual right now. Next item, deferred revenue. The biggest part of that is your unspent gas tax. So the unspent gas tax was approximately $1,020,000 at the end of 2020. Brandy's well aware of this. One thing we're always watching is there's like a time frame to spend that money. So if you don't spend it within 5 years, you have to send that money back. The township had been utilizing money each year. So in 2019, spent I think 175,000 of the gas tax. In 2020, you spent 250,000 of the gas tax. So you were utilizing it, and I know she is watching it, but we want to kind of manage that. We never want to be in a situation where we had projects that we could have utilized it on and didn't use them. But there was about $1,020,000 at the end of 2020 that hadn't been expended yet. There was some other small grants in there that hadn't been expended as well. Employee benefits payable. That's basically an estimate of employee future benefits for employees that are currently with the town. It's based on an actuarial estimate. It's a best guess of the costs that are going to be incurred by the township in the future by current employees and retired employees as they're utilizing their benefits programs and everything else. That's just going to be an ongoing thing, and we always rely on the actuary for that. So we got a report, a full-scale report that was received in 2019, and that'll create our estimate for 2019, 2020, 21, and 22, and then at that point, a new report is done. So if one hasn't been done already, we'll make sure that one is put in place. Working our way down, we're at solid waste. So that's your dump liability, your landfill liability. So in 2019, Atikokan closed their old dump, and so there was all the costs associated with closing and capping it that were incurred. And then the new site was opened and starting to be utilized in 2020. So what this liability is supposed to be estimating is what's it going to cost for me to continue to monitor my old closed site, and what's it going to cost for me to close my new site in the future when it's full. Okay. And so again, there's an engineer's report that looks at the amount of usage and the amount of capacity, and this is a best estimate of what the future liability is to close that landfill. Okay. Both of those items, I guess what it's kind of important to understand is like those liabilities, it's almost $1 million, but they're not going to come all at once, and they're not going to come tomorrow, right? So it's important that we understand they're there. It's important to plan for them, but it's not really a current liability. Okay, and I'll speak to that a little bit later when I show you the statement of surplus and reserves. But in the case of Atikokan, they've done a good job. You've done a good job of setting money aside, earmarking surplus for employee future benefits. So in the case of the employee future benefits, you've actually got enough money reserved to cover off that entire liability. Okay. The landfill is a little bit different. It's not funded right now, which isn't the end of the world. It's just something to think about for the future. But the life of your new landfill is significantly out there now because it's brand new. But at some point, one thing is to think about how we're going to fund this thing. Are we going to fund it through creating and building a reserve for it, or wait till the end, right?
John, we do have a reserve for it.
Okay.
And
is it part of the environmental or part of one of the bigger ones?
Environment.
Okay, perfect. So that's good. That's the prudent thing to do not all municipalities have a funded, fully funded those items yet, but if you do, that's great. But the point of it really, and why it's only been around for about 10 years is to make councils realize, right, that this liability exists and that we should be planning for it. That's the purpose of it.
John, it's Mayor Ferguson, and maybe Brandy can help answer too. So we invest that 442,000. So would that cover the inflation number and going forward? Is that, like you said,
no, that
maybe you'll get to $1 million, would be get there just through interest?
right? Good question. I think there's a couple parts to that. One is this liability is based on usage, so it's based on two things: present value, it's present valued, and it's based on usage. So let's say the estimate to close the new site is $4 million in 50 years, and it's only 10% filled. Then this liability is based on what percentage have we used so far, and what's the present value. So as time goes on and we utilize the landfill, this liability is going to continue to increase. So if you just had $400,000 sitting in an investment right now, and let's say it was earning 5% interest, that's probably not going to be growing fast enough to meet the liability at the end of the day. Does that answer your question, Rob?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Okay. I mean, it's funny now, right? Because even like I'll refer to it here in a little bit, when 2020 happened, interest rates were actually still falling too, which is odd. Like the interest rates were so low in 2020, there was almost like very, very little interest income being generated on investments. Whereas if you look at it in 2023 and 2024, it's a wildly different story, right? But so is inflation. So that's it's just kind of another piece. So it's a great question. The last item on the liability side is long-term debt. So I'm actually going to go to the note on this one, which, just bear with me. So it's on page 19 of the statements. So one thing I want to highlight here is you can see there's three components of the long-term debt. There was a CMHC loan that had to do with a bunch of, I can't remember which is which here, but there was an Infrastructure Ontario loan and the CMHC loan. One had to do with the Main Street revitalization, and the other one was kind of a combination of when you redid the pool and the arena and a bunch of work at the same time. Those two debts continued to exist and continue to be serviced over time. The one that's fallen off this year is the OPG debt. So in 2013, there was a really significant assessment disagreement. And as a result of that, the township received a bunch of funds, but then they reassessed the OPG, and so there was a bunch of money that was owed back to them. And I will say that they were nice enough, I guess, to allow you to repay them over time. But there's been $562,500 that was being repaid from 2013 until 2020, and the final payment was made in 20. So aside from new debts, the debt servicing is going in from 2020, where you had over $1 million of principal to service, went down to just over 500,000. So that was good. Okay. Back to the statement of financial position. So a really important measure in governments and municipal governments is this line right here, net financial assets. Okay, and what that represents is if I took, it's a little bit skewed because it's got the hydros in here, but if I took all my financial assets and turned them into cash and I paid off all my liabilities right away, I'm left with my net financial assets. So the town of Atikokan has 5.6 million of net financial assets. Last year they had 4.4. That's an increase It's an increase of almost 1.2 million, and that's good. I mean, you know, that means that you've got more cash and liquidity available than you had in the past. I don't know what the right number is here, but we certainly have municipalities that we've seen that have negative net financial assets, or so net financial debt, meaning they have, you know, taken significant long-term lending, sometimes for capital, which is okay, but again, they're in a very, you know, weak financial position from that perspective. And I would say Atikokan, you know, continues to strengthen, right? So to me, it's a good indicator that your net financial assets are growing. Now, with that being said, there's lots of capital work that always needs to be done. There's lots of projects. Everybody knows that fixing sewer and water and roads is very expensive. So, you know, that can eat up cash very quickly too. But the fact that you have a positive net financial assets, I think, is very positive. Again, we're talking about 2020, so can't wait to see where we're at today. But that was good at that point. The bottom section here is non-financial assets. So for the most part, that's your like brick and mortar, right? My roads, my arena, my sewer and water, my water treatment plant, everything at historical cost. Okay, so the township's carrying value of those assets are 51,549,000. Okay, versus 50,249,000 the year before. That's a big number. Basically a $1.3 million addition. But if we break that down, it was about $4 million of additions. So you did about $4 million of capital work in 2020, less about 2.7 million of depreciation. Okay. So you added more to your asset base than you wrote off. And what that was mainly made up of was just short of 3 million on the sewage and water system, 405,000 in a pumping station, which is also related, I suppose, 82,000 in sanitary sewer and water mains, 29,000 generated at the ski hill. You had 87,000 for air compressor at the fire department, about 210,000 on roads, and 18,000 on increasing the library collections. So those were your big items on capital additions. Obviously, been a lot of work in Atikokan on the sewer plant and program for a number of years, but that's where the increase comes from. Really nothing I wanted to comment on prepaids or inventories. Inventories of supplies is basically crushed gravel, fuel at the airport, and waterworks parts and backup stuff. So the last item is tangible assets under construction. So you can see there weren't any at the end of 2020. The end of 2019, I think it was the columbarium at the cemetery was partially completed, and it was completed in 2020. So when an asset is under construction, it's there at the end of the year, and then once it's available for use, it slides up into this tangible capital asset line. So that's everything on that statement. I'm going to speed up here quite a bit. So any questions on that? Okay.
We had a question from Councillor Knowles.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just a quick question. I didn't see it mentioned in the notes anywhere, but the change in revenue versus liabilities, how much of that can you attribute to something that happened in 2020 where a lot of the world shut down? If there weren't as many, say, services being offered, or there was access limitations, but revenue is still coming in through taxation, would that have affected it greatly?
I would say somewhat. That's a valid point. So if we get, why don't you just hold that thought for a minute, because we're going to go to the next statement, which is basically what happened during the year.
Perfect. Thank you.
And yeah, so what's interesting is you're correct, right? Like a lot of the revenues just continued to flow in. I'm just making some high level kind of general comments here, but this statement, what it really represents is what happened over the 12-month period. So what were my revenues for the 12-month period? What were my expenses for the 12-month period? And what was my surplus or deficit? So we talk about COVID for a minute, you know, taxation is taxation. You know, it got levied and collected to the extent possible. Okay, grants are grants. In fact, majority of the grants were capital and they were already in place. There were a few COVID type grants that the town was able to apply for, so that did increase the revenue a little bit, but I would say it wasn't a significant impact in 2020. Where I would say you saw more of the impact is on the expense side. Now, with that being said, like a lot of your labor ends up being fixed, right? Like a lot of your staff end up being fixed, but some aren't. Some of it would be services that weren't offered. So where I think it shows the best is, I'm going to come back to this for a minute, but if you go to note 14. Note 14, which is on page 24. So this is just a restatement of the expenses by object, we call it. And I think this is a lot more useful. The way it has to be reported on the statement of financial position is by service line, essentially, so by type. But here it's by object. So here it's all your salaries and wages for the entire organization grouped together. So you can see salaries and wages 2020 versus 2019 were down. Materials were down significantly. Contracted services were up. I'd have to dig into that to see a little more what it is. But in general, your overall expenses were down. And I would argue that a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, in a lot of cases, there was just less being offered. Okay. So if we come back here and see this is exactly the same amount. If you look at that note, you'll see that the total expenditures by object is 12,266,000. This is reporting it by segment or by type. But overall, the overall expenses were down by 636,000. Big chunk of that, of course, is amortization. There was more capital happening in 29, so there was a bigger write-off of assets in 29 than there was in 2020. But there was still a reduction. On the revenue side, just a few general comments. You can see government transfers, provincial was way down. Again, back to that story of the sewer treatment plant. There was big work happening, plus a bunch of road resurfacing that happened in 19, and there was just way less of that happening and completed in 2020, so the number was down. User fees, again, in line with that question of, you know, there was less happening, I think, later in 2020 with COVID. So if we look at that, sure, like arena fees, you know, pool fees, all those things were reduced on the user fee size. There was a couple unusual ones in there though that did bring the profit or the revenue back up. There was an insurance payout in 2019 that had to do with some damage to the hangar roof that came in. But then in the current year, there was also an insurance payout that had to do with the theft that occurred. So those monies were received in 2020 and did increase the revenue. So, but at the end of the day, the municipality had a $2.5 million profit or surplus. One thing I want to comment on there is government reporting is a little awkward that way from the perspective of if you do a major capital project and that capital project is funded through grants, you're going to have a surplus. So the easiest way to explain that is if I get $1 million from the province to redo my sewer system, that's $1 million of revenue. But that sewer system is going to last for 50 years. And so I write that $1 million off over a 50-year period. So in that first year, you've got a huge surplus because you got $1 million of revenue and you have a small percentage of amortization. So just because you have a surplus doesn't necessarily, or just because you have a deficit doesn't necessarily mean you're doing a good or bad job. And I always like to kind of highlight that, or it doesn't mean, you're charging too much taxes. It's really an indication of the fact that you're adding assets to the municipality, but those assets were being primarily funded through government grants. That's the main underlying factor. Okay. Okay. I'm going to really speed up now. So the remainder of the financial statements, there's something called the change in net financial assets. So I talked about the financial indicator before, and the fact that your net financial assets increased by 1.2 million. This statement just goes through that, so we've already talked about that. Something called the statement of cash flows. So this takes you through, if my cash increased by 2,171,000, why is that? And I said the primary reason was the collection of provincial grants, less, repayment of long-term debt, and less purchase of capital assets, but you also received significant capital grants in the year. So this takes you through kind of where that cash went or came from during the year, but you did have an increase as discussed. Then there's essentially the notes. So this talks more about what's included in the financial statements, the different accounting policies that the township follows. They're all in compliance with public sector accounting standards. And then you get into the notes, okay? And the notes are just more information supporting the balance sheet or the statement of financial position. So I've already gone through it, so I'm not going to go through each one in detail, but note 1 gives you details on the government business enterprises. So goes on to the next page, shows Atikokan Hydro, Atikokan Enercom, what assets and liabilities are there, what your profit was for the year in the pickup. Then again, a little more detail on cash and cash equivalents. So there was $7 million of assets, of cash there at the end of the year, but of that $7 million, 2.2 of it roughly is completely unrestricted. 3.8 of it you've restricted by virtue of setting up a reserve or reserve fund, and then $1,020,000 has been restricted externally, and that's the federal gas tax. So they specifically say in the federal gas tax that money shall be spent on qualifying spends, and in the meantime it has to be held as cash. So that's why that gets reported there. So again, a little bit more detail on the payables. There's some disclosure on the OMERS pension. So we have an obligation to disclose that you're part of that pension and what the township's contribution was for the year, which again is reported here. There's some additional detail on the deferred revenue. Talked about that. The biggest item being the federal gas tax. And you started the year with $1,092,000 of deferred gas tax, received $167,000, earned interest on that, on the savings you have of $11,000, and spent $250,000. So that leaves you with your $1,020,000 left to be spent moving forward. A little bit of disclosure on the landfill liabilities, some disclosure on the debt. We already went through this note. There's also an obligation to report what your interest costs are going to be moving forward, at least based on what they're known to be at the time. Some detail on the capital assets, purchases, disposals for multiple years. And then I want to spend a little bit of time on this one. This is a note that basically breaks down the surplus, okay? Because the township's accumulated surplus is $57,391,000. That's a really, really big number. What does that mean? So this note really breaks it down, and I'm just gonna go by section here. So the top section is, what is that 57 million invested in? Well, 47 million of it is capital assets. So that's basically your capital assets of 51,500,000 less the related long-term debt means you have equity in those capital assets of 47,700,000. You have a general sorry, go ahead. Any questions on that? Okay. The next section is current operating. So this is your current operating funds that you would bring into the next budget typically. You could see in the previous year it was significantly more. What happened between 2019 and 2020 is that the council at the time, as part of their budget or resolution, put additional funds into reserve. So the reserve funds did increase significantly from 19 to 20, which makes sense. But we still had some general operating that was sitting there at the end of 2020. The next section is what we call other allocated deficits. The reason these are separated is because I mentioned that before. These are the liabilities that you're not going to pay for in the next year. So like the landfill closures in 50 years. We want to recognize it exists, but you don't have to fund the whole thing necessarily, although you do have a reserve fund, as Brandy said, that would be included down here to cover it. Employee future benefits, same thing. You got a $614,000 liability, but employee future benefits, you also have a $625,000 reserve fund. So in 2019, you can see that the employee future benefit reserve was 448,000 and the liability was 624. One of the things we actually talked about that year was, hey, you might want to think about funding that reserve so that it's fully funded, and the council at the time did that. So the employee future benefits at 2020 were actually overfunded by about 11,000 bucks. The last two sections, from kind of reserve funds down to reserves, these are all the money, the earmarked money that council has said, I want to use the surplus in the future for a specific purpose. So whether it's fire department, roads, environmental, whatever the reserves are, you're earmarking that surplus. There's some working capital, and then the very last section is your investment in government business enterprises. So that's your hydro and your Enercom. So that's what makes up the 57 million. Okay, so what's left is,
Sorry,
again,
we have a question from Councillor Johnson.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain what the environmental expense is there for 1.7?
Yeah, so that's environmental reserve. So that's money that council has said of the surplus that the township has. There's 1.7 million that's been put aside for future use on environmental projects. So Brandy, you might have to chime in on this, but the majority of that is water and sewer projects. So you're saying of our surplus, we want to make sure we have these funds available for the future projects for that.
Thank you.
Yes, and it also includes the landfill closure.
Okay. That's sufficient. So there's some additional notes here that give, again, some more detail of what we've already gone through. I'm not going to go through these in detail. And then there's something called segmented information. So again, segmented information is a requirement. It's just another way to present the financial information we've already gone through. Okay, so if you look here at the revenues and expenditures, I know it's hard to see. The revenues and expenditures, the total surplus for the year is the same as what we talked about and the same that was reported. We're just looking at it by segment, they call it, to try and get a different view of where the money was spent, where it comes from. I find this to be helpful in some ways, but also can be a little bit misleading because, for example, unconditional grants. Well, you get your OMPF or whatever they call it today, that's an unconditional grant that the town of Atikokan gets. We can't say that X number of dollars is spent on protection services, X number of dollars is spent on transportation. So that revenue just gets allocated pro rata across those projects. So it's really though on the expense side where I find this is a little bit more interesting, because you can see, you know, the wages and benefits, the materials, the contracted services by the different departments. Again, it's just information and provides some more insight to the numbers, right? And then the last section of the financials is the trust fund. And the only trust fund the town of Atikokan has is the perpetual trust for the cemetery. That's a provincially mandated trust. So it's basically funds there to cover off the liability. So that's the financials. Any other questions on them?
I'm not seeing any here, John.
Okay. I prefer to do this in person, and that's certainly my intention in the next year, because it's a lot easier and more engaging, I find, to be done in person. So we'll plan for that for sure. If mayor and council are comfortable with these financials, I'd ask that you put them forward to be approved. And as soon as we have the approval, we're in a position to issue them and have them finalized as soon as this week. So
Sounds good. We have a resolution.
Yeah, John, we have a resolution coming forth
Okay.
to council at our next meeting here right after Committee of the Whole, so
okay, perfect.
we'll send that off to you.
Excellent. Yeah. Otherwise, we've already given the FIR. We'll send a little final report that just kind of captures the items we just talked about in summary. And we do normally do a management letter too. So I don't have anything in that management letter. It's not a management letter; is a letter to administration that says, you know, here's some other things we found, but they don't really impact your audit, but it's something to kind of be aware of. So we didn't have any items on there we really wanted to raise. I mean, the only obvious one that is really the timing, right? Like obviously being behind is not good from a decision-making factor, from everything else, but I think everybody recognizes that, and we want to get caught up as soon as possible, and certainly we want to be part of that solution. So
Sure. We have one more question here from Councillor Johnson.
He just answered my question. Thank you.
okay,
All right, I guess you already
perfect.
answered it, John.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, otherwise, thank you. Appreciate the business and appreciate the attention. And
Yes.
yeah,
Thank
I
you
think
for
we're in
taking
good
the
shape.
time.
Awesome. Okay, thanks everybody.
Appreciate it.
Here in 2021 and 2022 this year as well.
Repeat that one more time.
Oh, looking forward to seeing you again presenting for 2021 and 2022 this year as well.
In person. In person.
Okay.
You betcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Be good, guys.
All right. I do not believe our other delegation is here. So we will move on then to Committee of the Whole reports, starting with Administration and Employee Relations, Council Travel and Education. That looks like Leah.
Sure is. I have it on my laptop. Thank you, though. My first report tonight is just in regards to training and education. This is something council has requested. We do have a council travel policy and an employee travel policy. As they are under review, they're linked to the education and training policy. So once I got into working on them, it became a much bigger job. So just to address some of the issues we're having in the meantime, we're recommending the procedure as detailed in my report. If anyone has any questions, I'm also looking just for feedback from council on the procedure as written, and if everyone's okay with that. That's it.
Yes, Jason.
A further comment to that, keep in mind that Roma and AMO, they fill up really quick. The hotels are really hard to get. So we are asking to kind of look into the future. I know it's hard to commit. What we've done, for example, is I've booked an extra room for AMO in August, with the understanding that probably, you know, we'll have another counselor attend with the mayor and myself. If not, I can always cancel it, but we're looking at doing that as well. The other comment is for the budget. So for the anticipated 2024 budget, I have increased that amount to $15,000, taking into consideration that extra person to travel. We can certainly increase that, but we were looking over the last couple of years and steadily increasing it as the participation increased as well.
Yes, Mayor Ferguson.
Madam Chair, through the chair, if we book somebody for AMO today, and then in May they decide they can't go, can we switch their registration without penalty, or?
I believe you can. Generally, we'll wait on the registration. It's really the hotel rooms that are the hardest things to get. Travel, the air flights are usually pretty good, and registration we can do it pretty close to right up to we go. It's the hotel rooms that are really tough, surprisingly. Yeah. But I think we can switch it though. To your point, I think we can switch the name.
Okay, yeah, because I know with AMO I had to book and pay for my room in January.
The registration for the
Came
event.
off my visa, yeah.
Yeah, the early bird to take advantage of the early bird pricing.
Yeah.
You do want to register early, correct? Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any issues with the procedure as presented? Do we want to discuss that further? Would we like to move forward as presented?
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome. All right, moving on then to the Council Chambers retrofit, which is that Leah again?
Me again, yeah. So this report I just wrote, it's kind of unusual. We don't normally do reports like this, but because this project was so connected to council, and I know it was really unclear at stages in the project where we were, I just put a report together to explain that everything, the Council Chambers retrofit is complete. Our meetings are now being live streamed. This meeting is live right now. They're archived on our iCompass portal and our YouTube, and then I just made a little graphic on the second page to explain how everything connected together, because there was kind of different phases of the project, and if we really want to go back, it all started with the town website. So I just want to make clear kind of what these TVs had to do with us being able to live stream. So it's just a report to say that the project pretty much is complete.
Yes, Jason.
Also, to provide further comment, you'll notice that Mike's not here today, so the staff are, the press are taking advantage of that. They can always go back and review those meetings. So we are finding some things we never thought of that are being taken advantage with the fact that we're online now.
You say pretty much completed. What's left?
There is nothing left. I say pretty much because it causes challenges every day and I'm still learning the system. So like, for example, today's meeting is being live streamed, but I had to kind of mess with it for an hour because the time change made everything not sync up anymore. Like it's a complicated system. So there's new things I'm learning with it every day, but the installation is complete and we have the end goal of being live streamed. So.
Mayor Ferguson, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'd just like to commend Leah and Sue for getting this done. I know there was a lot of growing pains and there was some frustration on everybody's part, but things like this just don't happen overnight and they just don't come out, perfect. So I'd just like to commend them for this. And going forward, it's going to be a great tool and it's going to save the municipality money and, it was well worth it. So just thank you very much for that.
All right, nothing further. We will move on then to Public Works, Airport Waste and Management Department update. Going to Tyler.
Well, you guys saw the update we sent out. Kind of give you guys a high level over it. Already at 7 water breaks this year, so we've only had 1 week where we weren't out fixing a water break, which is not looking like a good start to the year. The Mercury culvert, of course, coming along pretty well now. We got the other footing poured, which is a pretty big milestone now, and we're going to start getting some pipe work actually done, so that was nice to see. The fleet, we are removing our oldest truck, which is always nice. So it's an old 97 two-wheel drive pickup truck. You guys probably see it around town watering flowers. It was just at the point where the list to keep it on the road is getting too long. So we're gonna have to pick up 1 or 2 trucks to replace that as well. We're gonna cycle in Kelly and Bill's trucks into the fleet and put 2 smaller trucks, I guess, technically for those 2. So we're going to be bringing a resolution here at the next meeting asking for the approval of the equipment budget just so that we can move forward with that. Waste management was running well. At the end of November, we were already at about 315,000 in revenues, which is astronomical compared to what we used to get, so that's good. We've been reaching out to our contractors for the MHSW event, Household Hazardous Waste as we normally hear it referred to. GFL will not reply, and they wouldn't reply to us last year when we asked for quotes, so Miller is the only game in the market now, it seems. So we're gonna like to pass a resolution to approve that budget. It'll be 20,000, and we're tentatively scheduled for April 18th because they have an event in Thunder Bay that they're doing, so they can just come over here when they're done, and we're gonna save a little bit on travel if we can lock them in early enough. Crack sealing, about the same thing. We're going to be looking for a resolution to approve that. It's the usual 25,000 in roads, 25,000 in airstrip. And the only reason that we're kind of trying to rush this one through per se is if we can confirm by the end of March, we get last year's pricing still. So we're going to be having a resolution for that as well.
Yes, Councillor Johnson.
By the 1st of March, yeah. He's promised us it should be here in a day or two, so we basically told him we're not paying rent for March, and if you don't get it till July, we're not paying anything until then either. So we'll fight that out with them and see what happens.
That was my second question. My third question is, which streets are you going to target for
We're gonna do Mark Street. As you saw, there's already like a pretty good crack starting on that just from sub-base problems. And then we're gonna drive around and kind of come up with that list once the frost is out.
Would you be concentrating on streets that recently paved so we can state them?
Yeah, so we're probably gonna do some more on Willow. We'll probably do a little bit over on Hemlock in front of the church where we did that big patch. I've noticed a couple other spots in the list just from walking around, so. Unfortunately, Main Street's getting a little bit past the point where crack sealing is gonna save it, so.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a really quick question. The waste management through GFL, right, the recycling, do they know how many homes that they generally do? I feel like I might have asked this question before.
Like on a weekly basis? Like
yeah, just what's their actual kind of average uptake on picking up recycling so we know how effective we are as a community in recycling?
Yeah, so funny enough, we actually just finished doing our annual reports, which include diversions. And when we reached out to CMO to get those numbers of what GFL has collected, they basically refused to give them to us. So we're kind of fighting with them right now.
Okay.
And I've asked GFL to provide them, but they obviously have to look through like all their agreements to make sure that they aren't giving out like proprietary information. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on the report to council? Hearing none, we'll move on to NAV Canada Agreement.
Yeah, so this is the same one that we talked about last meeting, I think, or meeting before that maybe. NAV Canada looking to lease a spot of land up at the airport, put a tower up for civil aviation navigation purposes. So we completed the agreement, or the negotiations, I should say, with them. We got them in for $2,500 the first year, and we built in a 2% escalation every year. So it seemed like it was kind of in line with what council was hoping to see. So happy that they were on board with that. And every problem I had with the agreement, they just struck it right out. So they were easiest set of negotiations that I've had to do since I've been here.
Any questions on that? Hearing none, we'll move on to 3, the E360S Agreement.
So this is a new one here. Just speaking of hazardous waste, right? So as you guys know, we accept batteries at the waste day. So I looked back at last year's, and it was about $2,000 that we paid just to recycle batteries, which is quite steep for sure, right? And you're talking about a $20,000 event, and 10% of it is just for batteries. So we managed to find a supplier of services, to say, who will basically give us a couple buckets, and then they'll come and pick them up for free. So we're hoping to have a couple spots around town to make it easy for people to, like, really easy to get rid of your batteries. So I think we're planning on having one here. I know Bill was talking to Home Hardware because they currently collect batteries, but what they do is then they just bring them to the hazardous waste event. So at least if we can get them to keep collecting batteries, that's one more spot. I was talking to Tracy at the library about it, so try and get them a few places around town and get all those batteries out of the dump. So there's not a huge financial impact on this one. You know, you're talking about $2,000, like in the grand scheme of the budget, it's not much, but it's certainly something that's could be better suited to not batteries. The other important thing is that there is a couple types of batteries that they'll pay us for, but they're pretty rare, so I don't think we'll be bringing in much revenue. And just to clarify, this is batteries under 5 kilograms, so we won't be taking car and truck batteries, but basically any like household residential battery.
So this will just be, the buckets will be around all year. Whenever they get full, they'll come and pick them up. And this.
Yeah, so we'll probably, just because we're a bit remote, they're gonna probably want us to do a drum, but we're gonna get some buckets as well, and then when the bucket gets full, Bill will go and grab it and dump it in the drum, and then when the drum gets full, we'll come and get the drum, sort of thing.
Perfect. Any other questions for Tyler on this? Is council, okay, we have a couple of options. Seems like everyone's in agreement, acceptance, yes? All right then, moving on to the 2023 Annual Drinking Water System Report.
Yeah, so this is the report, we get them every year for the water system, both treatment and distribution. Happy to say this was a pretty good report. Basically the same in that our only real exceedance for anything was the HAAs, which was common with last year as well. So it's getting a little better. The actual inspections that we get every year for the drinking water were probably the best I think that we've ever had. A couple small issues with Northern, like a little bit of record keeping, things like that. But happy to say distribution, I think we actually got 100% this year for like the town staff. So it's a big pat on the back for the crew there. And other than that, yeah, it was just kind of, we'd have to pass it basically and show you guys. So I figured we'd just get that on here and see if anybody had questions.
Councillor McQuay.
Thank you, Chair. Tyler, I know a lot of people are concerned when the hydrants are being flushed and we have the color in the water. Do you think you can sort of speak to that so we can put peace of mind to our community in regards to that? Because I know lots of people are questioning about, well, should there be a boil water advisory and what testing's happening during those times?
Yeah, sure. So that's a good question.
Thanks.
The hydrant flushing is, obviously it's part of maintenance, so that you get all that dirt out of there. So it's not dirt, I should revise that. It's sedimentation, right, from everything that's left in the water once it's done being treated. And then, of course, having so much old cast iron pipe in the ground, it gets tuberculated, it holds on to that and things like that. So the water is still 100% safe.
Yep.
So there's no need for boil waters. There's no need for additional testing while it's happening. But yeah, it's just system disrupt, right? We get it even during fires or things like that too. I know when the high school charged their sprinkler system, it disturbed a fair bit of water in the system too, just because it's used to flowing one way, and then you open a hydrant and sometimes it flows the other way, and it stirs things up in the pipes. So the only thing that we can really do to improve on that is just the continued replacement of water mains. We're thinking that the O'Brien replacement that's coming up this summer should actually help pretty good with that anyways. So,
thank you.
no problem.
Go ahead, Jason.
Tyler, historically, Northern Waterworks has come and done a kind of a verbal presentation. Are they still going to do that with this year, or are we accepting the report?
Yeah, we were just accepting the report. I think I've handled the last 2 or 3 of them. I don't think we've had somebody come in and do it since Jay LeBlanc has left the company. So
it's still an option, I guess, though, right? If council did want that, I mean, further.
Yeah, we could probably reach out, and I'm sure they'd be able to drum somebody up to come and give you guys a presentation. Pretty big outfit now, so.
It's just an option out there if council has more questions that Tyler can answer, but like you said, it's a good report, and
I just had one question about the non-compliance item, about the more than one OIC logged in, but only one of them doing work, and then it just looks like it went to another board, and then that was kind of it. They didn't provide anything further. So, were these our employees?
Nope, this is over at the plant. So basically, sometimes you'll have two operators that are doing different things, or sometimes there will be an operator who's on call and then has to get called out and then sign in as OIC. So it was just kind of a small record keeping, like literally a check mark in the book. So
Okay, but it's been it wasn't, well, not any of ours, but it's our plant that this issue is happening at. Okay.
yeah, like I said, no non-conformances on the distribution side, which is good.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mayor Ferguson.
Through the chair, I'd like to ask Tyler, it says major expenses occurred in 2023. Are these over and above what we pay, or is this included in our water program?
These are the expenses that we incur through our M&S and capital budgets, so they aren't operational. The agreement we have with NWI is only for the operation of the plants.
Okay, so these are approved expenses that we did,
yeah.
Upgrades we did, okay. No, I was just making sure that they're just not, it's going through the proper channels.
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah,
all
they're
I'm
very
saying.
diligent about following the proper procedures on those, so I have to approve every single one of them to
Okay.
actually get done. So.
Okay, great. And if I could have just one more question. When we had an upset condition, I think it was in July, where correct me if I'm wrong on my terminology, but that overcharged the system. Correct. And there's some water breaks. Did we eat all those costs on that, or did they take responsibility on the extra costs for their mistake?
No, those were our costs, but they came with a very stern talking to as well. So should that happen again, we're going to be in a better position to go at it for levels of cost recovery at least.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions? All right, thank you, Tyler. We will move on to fire and property. MNRF Fire Management Agreement. I'm guessing that's...
Thank you, Chair. So everybody's got a report of what MPA or Municipal Protection Area and Ground Protection Area is. I think everybody understands that concept, that the local fire service protects the buildings and somewhat the bush around the buildings to a certain barrier. So every year, or every 2 years, there's a renegotiation of how much land the municipality can protect with the services we provide, and how much land within the boundaries of the town the MNRF will protect. So every second year there's a discussion, and it comes before council for approval. So in this particular case, there was some significant changes in that the property formerly known as Steep Rock Mine changed hands, went to the Crown, and therefore it would be foolhardy for us to, as a municipality, to offer to protect a mine that's owned by the Crown when it's primarily covered in forest, which is the MNRF's job. However, in the same sort of time frame, we've had property development along La Rome, which then would fall under the municipality for fire protection, being that the structure fires, or structures, that potential fires, that the MNRF would not fight. So during the discussions back and forth with the MNRF and myself, we came up with a new boundary, which I can show you, but it's just a pretty colored map. But the financial impact to the municipality in 2023, the boundaries would have included the mine, but did not include La Rome. And then some of the changes that we made in 2023, before the changes, the total cost to the municipality was $4,856.80. And then with the changes, should council adopt to approve them, the 2024 cost would be $4,815.45, a difference of $41.31. So how that impacts us is not the $41. What that means to us now is if there's a fire up in the former mine area, we would directly be paid from the MNRF to fight that fire. It doesn't mean we won't respond, and it doesn't mean anything different if we were requested to respond. We would obviously advance our crews into that area. What it does mean, though, is that we're not on the hook for it. If there was a fire in the mine in previous years, which of course the growth was smaller, and each year it's getting more, but had there been a fire occur in the mine and we lost control of it, we'd be on the hook for whatever the ministry bring in, helicopters, bombers, etc. So my opinion, as you know, my recommendation is to adopt the agreement as presented and sign it, and it will be before you again in the next 2 years. Next year is just a renewal. We don't renegotiate. It'll be in 2026. It'll be before council next time.
Thank you, Grant. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Graham. Is there, I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification on, is there similar agreements between, say, the municipality and, say, private businesses that operate in high risk? I'm thinking, say, biopower, for example, if a fire occurred there where it goes on to, into our municipally protected area. Are there similar agreements like that that help shield us from actions otherwise?
No. So what we have is fire prevention and agreements with the local industries. It doesn't matter whether it's a factory or if it's something industrial in another area, schools, hospitals, hotels. We all have prevention packages that they have to adhere to. It is a legal obligation. When it comes to, say, a community or an establishment outside of the community, say the forestry group out at Sapawi, we can enter into a protection agreement with them, and then that's a complete unique world. But in our world, people pay taxes to be protected by the fire service. If it does reach out beyond their boundaries and sets fire to the forest, that's something that then gets negotiated between council, insurance, CAO, and the holder of their insurance. Insurance to insurance, basically.
Okay, so if for any reason there was, say, a fire that may have sparked at a private business, spreads onto municipally protected land, and we're required to get MNRF to drop the water bombers to put it out, we would be liable for those costs.
Again, I can't speak specifically to that. We will get the bill.
Okay.
Who pays it is, if your house catches fire and your house burns the house next door, I'm pretty sure they'll be calling you. Let's leave it at that.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Are we then in agreement to adopt the new changes as mutually agreed? Looks like it. All right. You have your recommendation. Moving on to the MNRF Airport Lease Agreement. That looks like Jason.
So this is an annual report until we do enter into a multi-year agreement with the MNRF. As you're aware, they do rent a portion of land at the airport. No significant changes to the agreement other than the built-in 2% increase to the base rent, which will go up to $12,734.50 this year. The only other change was there was language in there to a maximum of $200 per day for helicopters under the landing fee as per the current fee schedule. We removed that, and that was sort of a discussion that council had, regarding any of the service fees, that we would look at them and have those discussions and see where we can make changes. We felt that it was appropriate to remove that. And again, in some years where they have a small fire season, it wouldn't be an issue. The odd year where there is, then we would collect those appropriate revenues. So other than that, I believe the MNRF is in agreement. So if we can get that agreement passed, we will forward on to them for approval as well.
Any questions on that? Everybody in agreement? The recommendation looks good. All right, I think that is it for today then. I will call this meeting adjourned at 5:49. Adjourn.